Remember that this is the book report for Wuthering Heights. There will be spoilers. Proceed at your own caution. Hello friends, it's me, Steps Basic, and welcome back. Today let's cover the book report for Wuthering Heights. So, Wuthering Heights. I'm not going to lie to you here. I did not enjoy this book. So let's just get that out of the way immediately. I'll get into the finer points of why I didn't like it later, but for now, I want to make sure you know that going in. That being said, remember that this is my opinion of the book, and yours may differ. Moreover, that doesn't mean that there were no redeeming qualities for me. There are a few chapters, toward the end especially, that I thoroughly enjoyed. But before we get into all of that, let's break it down. Sorry, anyway. As before, let's begin with the setting. Wuthering Heights is set in a little remote English estate, roughly 5 to 10 miles in size. There is nothing specifically in the book that states this, of course. I'm just using context clues to establish this, just so you know. But don't think that I wasn't scientific about this. Oh no, I'll get to that. The estate is 2 homes. One, frustratingly called Thrushcross Grange. Thrushcross Grange. Thrushcross Grange. That's one word. The other is the titular Wuthering Heights. At the outset, not really, technically, but we'll get there. At the outset, these 2 homes are independent estates. One is owned by the Lintons and the other by the Earnshaws. Between the 2 homes is a 4-mile stretch of road, and surrounding them are the moors. I presume that the mileage is similar for the 2 homes, and their original boundaries met somewhere in the middle, stretched in the opposite direction in roughly the same distance, hence the roughly 5 to 10 mile span. Could be wrong, of course, but since no one stated outright, I also have just as much chance of being right. That's boring, sorry. Anyway, this gives our story such a nice little constrained setting of England in the late 18th century on a wealthy estate just outside of a town called Gimmerton. In some ways, this is tied to our themes of the book, but not nearly as effective as the setting of, like, say, The Scarlet Letter was. It does help lend us an understanding of the characters and their motivation, though. Specifically, this does tie in neatly with the theme of class divide. This theme is mostly background noise for a larger portion of the book, but not entirely. It plays a large part in the characterization of one of the lead characters, Heathcliff. Of course, we'll discuss more about him in the character section, but know that this really plays a part in his, growth as a character. Anyway, we'll sum it up with saying that he is an orphan, maybe, who was adopted by a rich man, but he was only accepted by that rich man and his daughter Catherine. The class divide is shown primarily in how Heathcliff is treated by others in the household and later by the Lintons, their close neighbors and other such stuff, especially after his shield, Mr. Earnshaw, aforementioned rich man, passes away. Get used to that. There are quite a number of deaths in this book. Anyway, I guess in a way that actually ties to the next one, because mourning and grief become a secondary theme in the book. So much happens, not just death really, but there's so much happens that creates just hardship for our characters. From abuse to romance to jilted lovers. It's just a smorgasbord of raw grief in a lot of cases. And the mourning and sadness really play like a background theme in the story, because it's like this is what every character is experiencing, going through, experiencing grief and sadness and remorse about some such thing happening. I will say, though, one other thing that I guess I can't completely neglect mentioning is romance. I hate that I have to add this here, and is partially one of the reasons why I dislike this book so much. It was sold to me as a romance book, so when I read it, I was expecting a romance story. But while there is romance in it, the only true emotion these characters share is obsession. The only true romance, the only real romance, comes at the end of the book, and all else was just a sick facade. The true main theme of the book, as I understood, was the cyclical nature of victimhood and family trauma, or generational trauma, as you will. Much like I mentioned before, the young Heathcliff was adopted by the Earnshaws, specifically Mr. Earnshaw, who I don't believe ever got a first name, though I may have forgotten it. While Earnshaw was alive, he treated Heathcliff well, sometimes even better than his own son Hindley. Naturally, this bred contempt in Hindley, who turned violent on Heathcliff after Earnshaw's death. Abuse was rampant. Heathcliff returned the favor, though. And not only on Hindley, but Hindley's own son, Hareton, and later Catherine's daughter, Cathy. We're going to call her Cathy. Technically, her name was Catherine too, but we're going to call her Cathy. And by Catherine too, I mean Catherine as well, not Catherine the number 2, because that'd just be weird. Anyway, we should know by now my feelings on vengeance, but this story only goes further to prove my point. Okay, anyway, let's move on to the characters. This is a complicated section because there are a lot of characters, and unfortunately, a lot of those characters are not important, except they play like a bit role or something. Anyway, but we're not going to talk about the unimportant characters. At least not, we're not going to talk about like Ruth or Dr. Green or not Dr. Green, Mr. Green, who's the lawyer, and I forgot what his name was, the doctor. We're not going to talk about them. They're not important. They do play like bit parts, but they're more of a plot device than a character. But anyway, so let's start off with Mr. Lockwood. He's the first character we meet in the story. I haven't really mentioned him yet because technically he's our audience insert. He's technically our narrator. He's technically a character. I know it sounds like a weird way to characterize this person, but bear with me. Lockwood is almost a completely superfluous character. You'll note that point if you watch any of the theatrical retellings of the story. I think the only time Mr. Lockwood was ever included was the TV miniseries, because he's like completely absent in any of the movies. Doesn't really matter. But essentially, Mr. Lockwood is in present day, and he rents the house at Thrushcross Grange. Seriously, try saying that word 3 times fast. Golly. Anyway, he rents the place from Mr. Heathcliff. Yes, the Heathcliff, who is now the owner of both estates. As I mentioned earlier, they exist as 2 separate estates only technically at the beginning, because they do end up merging, and by the time we start telling the story, they're one, but then we jump back and start telling. Anyway, not important. He is the outsider who comes, Mr. Lockwood specifically, is the outsider who comes in and gets curious about the family history of his realtor, Mr. Heathcliff. Now comes our second character. Yes, I'm skipping over the introduction of 4-ish, 4 to 5 other characters. Don't worry about it. We're skipping over them for now. We'll come back to them. But our second character is the true narrator of the story, as she does most of the storytelling, Miss Eleanor Dean, or affectionately referred to as Nellie or Ellen within the story. Honestly, she is the best person in the entire story. The only character I truly liked. She is the humble caretaker of the Grange when we first meet her, but she was also the head of the Heights at one point, and was responsible for taking care of Hindley, Heathcliff, Catherine, Hareton, and finally young Cathy. I guess rich people just can't raise their own kids, but hey, at least they had Nellie. I'd say, though, like, she's not without flaw. I'd say her biggest fault was that she was a bit nosy, and would not keep your confidence, especially if it was something her master, in this case Mr. Earnshaw and then later Edgar Linton, should know. But anyway, like I said, we skipped a couple of characters to talk about, but we're gonna go for important introduction times, and for the situation, those weren't as important. Anyway, even though we met Hareton, Cathy, and Heathcliff, by the time we meet Nellie, we want to talk more about them later. But so I'm going to cover the family tree. The family tree of the Earnshaws and the Lintons. Okay, so starting off, hopefully I get this right, we had Mr. Earnshaw, had no name, Mrs. Earnshaw, Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw were married. They're so cute. Anyway, they had a son named Hindley. They also miscarried a boy who was going to be named Heathcliff Earnshaw, but he obviously he's miscarried, so he didn't get the name. Anyway, that's not really entirely important. It's just a bit of information. But later was Catherine. Catherine was born. Catherine Earnshaw. And then after a trip to town on foot, Mr. Earnshaw, he walked to town, and this was a long walk too. It took it I think it was like 3 to 6 days, something like that. But anyway, he finds who was possibly, and I'll have to say in the book they use the slur for them, but he finds a possibly Romani child and adopts him by way of kidnapping. They talk about it in the book. It's like, oh, I found this kid. I didn't know what to do with him, so I just brought him home. Anyway, the kid may or may not have been an orphan. Neither the narrator nor Mr. Earnshaw actually knew. But anyway, he names the boy Heathcliff after the child that didn't survive. You remember that name, yeah? Mm-hmm. And then, there we go. So, Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, Hindley, Catherine, and Heathcliff. That's the Earnshaws. But after some time, Hindley goes off, gets married, has a son by way of birds and bees. Ask your parents. They have a little baby named Hareton. He'll be important later. Anyway, employed by them are a number of people, but only 2 of them are particularly important. Specifically, Nellie, the goat, and Joseph, who I absolutely hate. Like serious Bible thumper, talks with a thick accent that I can't understand and had a hard time reading. And I think he's supposed to be Scottish. So he's speaking Scots. Yeah. Which unfortunately made it very difficult for me to narrate that part. I actually looked up a translation guide for it. That's how bad it was. But anyway, let's go to the Lintons. In keeping with the tradition of the other family, the initial patriarch was only known as Mr. Linton. Mr. and Mrs. Linton have 2 children, Edgar and Isabella. After this, and through some fashion, Catherine marries Edgar, becoming Catherine Linton, and Isabella marries Heathcliff. Edgar and Catherine have little Cathy, and Isabella and Heathcliff have little Linton. Little Linton is not Linton, even though technically Heathcliff never had a last name, and Isabella was still Isabella Linton. They got married, so Linton is just Linton. But anyway, he's weird. Like I said, don't get too attached. By the end of the story, only little Cathy and Hareton survive. And Nellie, because she's the goat. And also, I suppose, Mr. Lockwood, but no one really cares about him. Oh, I've been rambling for too long. I find it hard to sum these people up other than to say that, for the most part, they are the worst people you know. Hindley was an abusive drunk after his wife died. Almost killed Hareton and treated Heathcliff like a hired hand. Hareton, as a result, grew up to be an angry, foul-mouthed brat. Heathcliff did much the same. But he was also violent. Very violent. Like, hang a dog and maybe we should have him tested violent. Catherine was headstrong, which is the nicest way to put it. She loved Heathcliff, but opted to marry Edgar as a way to make a better life for Heathcliff. Go figure. Not for love or anything, just so that she'd have an opportunity to uplift her violent boyfriend. Beyond that, she was whiny and emotionally abusive to the people around her, to the point that when she actually got sick, people didn't recognize it right away. Oh, just another one of her tantrums. Yes. Yeah. But anyway, Edgar, to be fair, the only true flaw was that he was a bit weak. He had been since he was a kid, really. He was not very outspoken and generally allowed people to walk all over him. But he did love Catherine. And after Cathy was born, he became a quite solid father for her. True growth. We love to see it. Isabella was headstrong. She was headstrong. In the more traditional sense, anyway. I wouldn't really call her a bad person, except that she fell in love with Heathcliff and ignored some massive red flags. See again the hanging of the dog. She endured the abuse until she just couldn't bear it any longer, and then she ran away to London, where she gave birth to little Linton. Cathy nay Catherine, like I said. She was actually Catherine the Second, Catherine Jr., whatever you want to call her. But she was for all intents and purposes a victim of her mother's obsession, in much the same way that Hareton was a victim of Heathcliff's. She was a good kid. And at the end of the story, she rounded back to being a good person. Unfortunately, she was forced to endure abuse by Heathcliff before she could get on with being an adult. She was particularly bad at reading the room and often pushed what she saw as minor jokes a bit too far, putting her on the wrong foot immediately with Hareton. Her cousin and future husband, Linton, what a waste of space. Admittedly, he was a sickly child and a very spoiled one. You saw a lot of that in the way he reacted to the others. However, I would be remiss in not mentioning that he did try to do one thing right. I almost missed it while I was reading it. I actually caught it back when I was editing the chapter. But he actually tried to protect Cathy from getting kidnapped by Heathcliff while her dad was dying. But unfortunately, much in the way that Catherine's behavior called to mind the boy who cried wolf, Cathy misread his concern for her as dislike and just another tantrum. Wow, that was a lot. All right. Well, my thoughts. Obsession is like love, except that it is so toxic it kills everyone around you and even poisons the next generation. And there's a lot of that in here. I am annoyed at how they sell this story as a romance, even considering how it ends. While love definitely exists in the story, it is at best an inconvenience and at worst a weapon. I started out as a first-time reader hoping to love this book. Then I hated it. It was boring. It was gossipy and had no characters that I really liked. Again, except for Nellie. I couldn't relate to anybody. And every bit of pity that I held for Heathcliff in the beginning vanished when I saw what he became. I'm not going to ignore the fact that he was a victim, but that doesn't excuse him victimizing others. I despise people who use the fact that bad things have happened to them as an excuse for being bad people. True, this stems from my own life, where I have tried over the years very hard to break that bitterness in myself. It's really difficult, I'm not going to lie. And yeah, I know, hurt people. But that's no excuse. Be better. I know I'm talking to a fictional character here, but there are so many men out there who are just Heathcliffs. We hate them. Punch him right in the kidney. Bam. Anyway, I will say, though, after finding out more about our author, I did soften to the book a little bit. Only a little, though. Bronte was only 15 when she wrote this, and it's quite telling. Moreover, this is her first and only book, so one can excuse her ignorance and mistakes. It doesn't make the book better, but now you can understand why it's bad. It's told from the perspective, from the thoughts and ideas of a 15-year-old in the 18th century. A 15-year-old wealthy, well-to-do woman girl in the 18th century. Of course, we already know my stance on vengeance stories. I hate them because it requires the characters to be stupid. But this overlooks another problem. Just simplifying it with they have to be stupid overlooks another problem, because vengeance corrupts. And I know that's often the theme when it comes to vengeance stories. Like, oh yeah, you have vengeance in your heart, you're going to get sick, you're going to die. That's often talked about. Doesn't mean I like it. Because much like I described obsession, vengeance is a toxin, and all it does is kill and poison those around it. So if it's a story about vengeance, it's just a frustrating mess of stupid people hurting other people. And there may have been a reason to side with Heathcliff, especially considering the mourning of Mr. Earnshaw, and he has to suffer as an outcast. But he turned out pure evil. And of course, we can point at Hindley and say, Hindley, this is your fault. We can point at the rest of the family and be like, this is your fault. But he still was evil. He still did evil. And he left for years and then came back to do his vengeance. Of course, Catherine wasn't much better. Catherine, she used the affection of those around her as a tool to hurt other people. I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, like using her whiny behavior, throwing tantrums, being like, "Hey, you don't love me. Oh, why have you done this?" And people are just like, "Yeah, shut up." But she used their affection as a tool to hurt them. Rude. But in the end, though, we do get to see Kathy's story. Believe it or not, these are the chapters that were actually good. Notwithstanding the cousin stuff, which, gross, but we get to see some happiness. Moreover, we get to see her guide her cousin Hareton away from the darkness Heathcliff shoved him into. Sadly, for me, these last few chapters, they were too little too late. Okay, all the negatives aside, I do have high praise for something in this book. I mentioned how the last chapters had me engaged, particularly around the story of Kathy and how she fought through to break the cycle of violence and generational trauma, but there was another part that was perfect to me. When I was younger, I was also led to believe that this was a ghost story. Though very little to nothing supernatural actually happens in this, there was a point that was readily open to interpretation. That was Heathcliff's death. From a position grounded in reality, we watch as the man slowly starves himself to death, but noticing that it will take entirely too long, he begins leaving the window open at night to let humidity and rain speed up the process. Heathcliff, prior to this, had begged Catherine to haunt him for the rest of his days. Looking at the sequence of events here, it could easily be interpreted that Catherine's ghost is preventing him from giving in and eating. To quote, Heathcliff was going to commence eating when the inclination appeared to become suddenly extinct. And even later points when Nellie could tell he was looking at something but there was nothing there. This fun ambiguity was written so the reader could interpret the ghost being there, or that Heathcliff's long madness and desire to reunite with Catherine was finally playing out. Alright, well, that aside was a great part. But I don't really recommend this book, especially if you're looking for a romance. Now I'm breaking the cycle. It is not a romance book. Well, it's a romance book. It's a dark romance, I guess. But anyway, I'm breaking the cycle. It's not a romance. If you're looking for a good romance, this is not it. However, if you're into rich people in the 18th century England, well, here you go. It's a perfect book for you. Gossipy and full of all that melodrama. Otherwise, I'm going to rate this book a 3 out of 10. And only because the last few chapters made me feel something other than frustration and annoyance. Anyway, that's it. That is a book report for Wuthering Heights. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to take the next couple of weeks just to do short stories and poetry, so recommend what you want to hear. The next full book will be The Turning of the Screw. Bye for now.